My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, and welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? I am your host, Richard Dix. This is, of course, HDTH. Here's episode 76. We're going to cover Russia. We're going to talk about all the things that Russia is and was, all of that good stuff. But before we get there, as normal, a little bit of housekeeping to get to. It's been a little bit of a hiatus. I think I missed 1 week. Had some stuff going on. Had to move, get some stuff down, so I didn't have time to actually get a podcast. And once I got into my new place, I had to figure out where to set up the studio and all that stuff. So it was an ordeal, but we are back at it. I'm going to continue to do this, to plug away and find out how things happen, because that is just how my mind works. Let's see, what am I watching? Right now, what am I watching? I have been watching a lot of Apple TV. They got a lot of good stuff on there. Let's see. I watched that Steph Curry documentary. Pretty good. A lot of stuff I didn't know about him. Doesn't change my perspective on him. I think, if anything, what it showed me is what I already kind of knew. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. I'm not going to say anything too bad, but he's just a rich kid. He's always been a rich kid. Even watching all the videos and everything, it's just like, it's hard to have quite the, I don't know, because especially you hear the things about him talking about, him and his wife were voted against that, putting the lower income housing by their house, or whatever. And it's like, that's just some stuff. If you've never been there, then you just, whatever. You have your own opinions on it. But it was good. It was a good documentary. I also watched, what's it called? The After Party. The After Party is really good. It's funny. If you're looking for something really funny, I would honestly mention that is something you should check out. It is basically there was a 10-15 year reunion for a high school. They all get together, go to the high school reunion. Afterwards, they go to an after party. At the after party, somebody gets murdered, and so the whole thing is a who done it, like a mystery of who at the party killed one of their classmates. But they make it really funny. Tiffany Haddish is the detective. So she brings her own brand and flavor to it. It's really worth your time. And the last thing that I saw, what am I watching? I just saw the Barbie movie. I just saw it, I think, last night, depending on when this comes out, 2 nights ago. It was funny. It was, dare I say, hilarious. I will honestly say that movie, I laughed from almost beginning to end. Almost beginning to end. There's not many movies these days that really give that to you. And it was just, it never took itself too seriously. It was just very, I don't know. It was definitely not a kid's movie. It was definitely not a kid's movie, that's for sure. And there was a lot going on. That's why I was totally worried. I could probably watch it again. So much going on. Let's see. What am I listening to? I've been listening to This American Life a lot. I've been listening to TED Talks pretty hard. I'm trying to say that there's a new pod in my life. I don't think there is. And I haven't done an audiobook in a while either. So I don't think I have anything new. Nothing new that I've been listening to. So yeah. So before we get on to the episode, go ahead and plug the things that I need to plug before we can start talking about Russia and all the things that's going to be about. So 7 days a week, you can find all the extras for How Did That Happen over at htthappen.com. Of course, there you'll find all the episode transcripts as well as pictures and videos for every episode. There's also a blog on there that has been neglected like a stepchild. So if you want to find a post from maybe 4 months ago, that's definitely where you want to head to. But all the extras, like I said, will definitely always be there for every episode. Got it pretty much caught up. I don't think I'm fully caught up, but definitely head over there. All the socials are pretty much the same thing at HDTHappen for everything. I will say, so we have the bite-sized bios that come out pretty much every other Monday. And they are going to start being in the same theme as our 40s to 70s, which is the whole podcast is now going to be, at least for the next, few weeks and months, we're focusing on, one theme. And then I'm going to probably do another time after that and, kind of bounce around. Just I feel like that's I got the idea from, there's a documentary that I watched years and years ago that was just so interesting to me. It's called Big History. And it was it's narrated by Bryan Cranston. I think it was done by the History Channel. I think it is. I'm pretty sure you can actually find it on YouTube. You should check it out. if you like documentaries, because what it does is instead of looking at one thing singularly or one event or one invention singularly, it looks at the entire it looks at it in its entirety. It looks at it, like, kind of zooms out and says, okay, well, this is what happened then, but what else is also happening in the world that also made that possible? You know what I mean? And what's that story? What did they have to do? How did they contribute? And that's what I feel like when we do these themes like this, it really allows us to look at everything in kind of a larger, more of a bird's eye view aspect of it, as opposed to just saying World War II. Okay, who was fighting in World War II? Oh, Russia, Germany, America. Like, well, okay, let's break down those different places and what they were going through before they even got into World War II, or what led them to get into World War II, or just different things like that. And that's kind of what we're going to touch on here in this episode coming up. And definitely, like I said, for the next few bite-sized bios will all be about figures in history from this time in particular. We're going to cover people, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Dr. King, different other people like that. But like I said, all that always comes out every other Monday at 4:30 a.m. This podcast obviously comes out every other Monday. Basically, just kind of alternates Mondays at the same time. I don't know if there's much else I want to say. Let's see before we get going. I don't think so, and I don't have a breaking old news segment because I'm just happy to be able to get a pod up this week. Honestly, it's been a lot of things have been going on these last couple weeks, so there's not a breaking old news segment, but it will be back again because I've been enjoying that. Honestly, I think that's a nice change. It's crazy to see how the pod has changed in the last year and a half. We've lost some segments. The roundup is gone. Things I didn't know of, those have been gone for months now, and we brought in some new stuff. Always going to be evolving with this, and that's what makes it kind of fun to do. So I don't think there's much else to say, as I don't like to drone on. So without further ado, as we know what to do, here is the pod. So we are here today to talk about Russia and all the things that Russia is. Not all the things that Russia is now, but all the things that Russia has been, more or less. We're going to go back a little bit to the beginning of Russia, and then jump forward to kind of the modern times as far as like the 19th to 20th century, and cover some things during that time. But as normal with this podcast, we kind of started relatively the beginning. So parts of the land that is today known as Russia was populated by various East Slavic peoples from before the 9th century. The first states to actually exert any sort of hegemony over the region were those known as the Rus people. They were a branch of Nordic Varangians who entered the region occupied by modern Russia sometime around the 9th century and set up a series of states, starting with the Rus Khaganate circa 830. Right, and so not much is known, I think, about these people beyond the fact that they actually existed, and they were kind of the beginning of Russia. Now, in Russian historiography, two cities are described to be actually the beginnings of kind of Russia. One is Kiev. I'm not really sure which one it is. I like saying Kiev, right? But I'm not from there, so my opinion probably doesn't really matter. If you told me it was Kiev, I'd believe that too. There's that one, and then there's another city called Novgorod. They both still exist today. Kiev is still called Kiev. I think Novgorod has a couple other names added to it as well. Let me see. I don't know if I still have the page up. I don't think it's like Novgorod Oblast or something like that. Velky Novgorod. And so these were the first, basically the first two real cities that Russia can kind of lay claim to, and kind of still feels that they're, pretty important. It's kind of, I think, one of the reasons that the Ukraine war is happening right now. But yeah, so that's the beginning of Russia pretty much, and I'm not going to cover too much more about that time because this is just we could do this all day because maybe I will come back at some point and do it. But these, the Russians, there's a lot. There's a lot here. And so, yeah, like I said, we're going to time jump. We're going to time hop, if you will, up until about the 1800s, which is where I feel that Russia kind of becomes, really kind of lays the bricks for the USSR and what would be I don't want to call them the modern Russia because the modern Russia is what we have now, but kind of the old modern Russia, the old guard of modern Russia. So that I think that all starts in the early 1800s, right around there, because what we'll find is that Russia had been a monarchy just like all the rest of the European countries for a long time. They had their own lists of kings. Actually, I think all kings. Let me look back. I mean, I have it up here. See, I have all of the Russian leaders for the last 1,000 years. That's interesting. I'm trying to see if there's ever been a woman now that I'm seeing, because I never. I'm not seeing one woman. Interesting. That's a side note. And maybe there is. That's a Google search to do at some point. But they were like I said, they were a Russian monarchy. They were ruled by a lot of the same families. The Rurikids were one of the first ones to rule Russia. This was in the 1100s, and then we get down to the Danilovichis. They ran for a little while, and then we get to the Romanovs. And the Romanovs are basically the last royal family of Russia. That's where we get Tsar Nicholas II. He was, related to all these. Granted, now there were more. By that time, there was a lot of hyphens in this name. It wasn't just the Romanovs anymore. It was the Holstein, Gottorp, Romanovs to be specific. But they were the last Russian family, Russian royal family. And so that during this time, what we're talking about is the Romanovs are ruling in the early 1800s. Is why I'm saying this, to kind of set the foundation, the groundwork for this. And so in 1825, what we get is the Decembrist Revolt. Right now, this is kind of important because, well, I'm not really sure. Let me see. To be honest with you, yeah, I mean, it is because basically I think that if I can remember correctly, what happens here is basically Emperor Alexander the First, he dies, and then he's supposed to have his heirs, I believe his children, was Constantine and Nicholas the First. Constantine did not want to have the throne. Nicholas ended up taking the throne. But the people who were kind of on either side, they were basically fighting over who was going to actually be the king. And so this happened. And then afterwards, Emperor Nicholas I, he ends up being, the next kind of leader of Russia. But what really happens is this is the first time that a revolution of sorts kind of takes place. It wasn't a revolution, which is why I don't think it's called a revolution specifically, but it was an uprising, I think is maybe one of the better ways to put it. And it showed the Russian monarchy that they had to kind of get some things together, because if they didn't, people were going to, do something about it, which I don't think is something they ever thought about before that time. They hadn't really thought about the idea of being overthrown in any capacity. So that's, I think, one of the things that marks a change, I think, in the idea of the Russian people, because they really do end up fighting themselves out of a kingdom, which a lot of countries do that. When you really think about it in a more abstract terms, we did the same thing in America. We just did it differently. But, that happens in a lot of different places. They don't want to be run by, just a rich family who's telling you what to do. And we see that that's what happens because, long story short, the Russian people get really unhappy and they join these different councils and yada, yada, yada. That's how we get them to the USSR. But we're going to get there. But so, yeah, Decembrist Revolt, 1825. There's some troops, they fight. Like I said, we get Emperor Nicholas I. We can skip on down a little bit. I think the next thing that really bothered people was in the mid-1800s. They had ended up outlawing serfdom, kind of changing the entire landscape for how people made money in the country. And we've talked about serfdom before on different podcasts. We covered it. I think the first time we talked about it was for knights, because knights lived during that time, something or other like that. But basically, when serfdom is kind of like, let's say you are the person, you're the poor person, you are working and living on someone's land, and they basically make all the main money off the proceeds. They get all the profits off what you're doing, and you get a percentage of it that allows you to kind of stay alive and keep working there. But you don't actually own anything, so you don't really get to make a lot of money. You just kind of live. But that's just the way it was run. There wasn't a capitalistic society where you could sit here and kind of like promote yourself and this is my brand. It's like, nah, man, you just work for this dude. He comes, he gets money from what you do. stuff like that. But once they took that away, they didn't really put anything in its place, and so it left people feeling kind of out in the cold as far as like, how do I now provide for my family? So it leads to a lot of unhappy people. This kind of just builds the the unrest, the unhappiness within the ranks of the Russian society. And we continue to do that on up into the 20th century. Right around the turn of the 20th century was when we actually see the beginning of a lot of these actual organizations. I believe is it the Bolsheviks? I believe the Bolsheviks were formed, I think, in 1898. Let me see if I got that right. Well, this here is saying 1903, but I swear I saw something that said 1898. But they would end up becoming the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which is kind of the communist part of the Soviet Russia. I might be jumping the gun a little bit because we do have a couple revolutions and stuff that happened before that, but that is the foundation of it. So we'll get to the 1905. What is it called? The Russian Revolution of 1905, also known as the First Russian Revolution, because as we'll see, the 20th century, the early 20th century, just brings nothing but fighting for the Russian people. For pretty much from like 1905 for the next like 20 years, all they do is fight, whether it be fight themselves or fight other people. It's just fight for these Russian people. So basically, in 1905, specifically January 22nd, some people say May, some people say January, depending on who you ask, there was a wave of mass political and social unrest that then began to spread across the vast areas of the Russian Empire. This unrest was basically primarily directed against the Tsar. They were just mad at the rulers, mad at the Russian nobility, mad at the ruling class. This included, the unrest included worker strikes, military mutinies, all these things. They were just, really showing all of their discontent with their rulers. In response to the public pressure, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to go back on his earlier authoritarian stance and enact some sort of reform. Basically, he gave them a constitution. This is an audio medium, you can't see. I have air quotes over the constitution. Like I said, his response took form his response came in the form of establishing the state Duma, the multi-party system, and the Russian Constitution of 1906. Despite popular participation in the Duma, the parliament was unable to enact any actual laws, because pretty much any time that they brought something to Nicholas, he was like, "Nah, we're not going to do that." Like, it was really just some stuff just to kind of shut the people up, literally just to be like, "Look, you got a constitution, just don't ask for nothing, we won't talk about it." So just and all of this is why they continue to have revolutions, is because what they're asking for never actually happens. They continue to kind of just get nothing in return for what they're asking for. They say, "Hey, we want better working conditions." And there's also a thing with, I guess they wouldn't let certain people in the military, like the actual indigenous people of Russia. I guess they wouldn't let them in. So a lot of people were unhappy during this time, and that's what leads to the rise of communism in Russia. And that's something that I've always wondered: how did it get there? How did it get in Russia? And we'll find the main strain of communism in Russia is called Marxism. Marxism is a method of socioeconomic analysis that uses a materialist interpretation of historical development. Hold on, my computer is freezing. Better known as historical materialism, to understand class relations. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to explain communism to you, but it is the main proponent of the USSR, so it is pretty important. It originated from the works of 19th century German philosophers Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. As Marxism developed over time into various branches and schools of thought, no single definitive Marxist theory exists. They were kind of just out there just freewheeling with, like, my version of Marxism, your version of Marxism, you guys, your Marxism and my Marxism, or however you see that. Now, my understanding of communism, which of course is not a very complex one, and it comes also with my own outside opinion as well, is it is a lot about the the equality of man and trying to create a better man, all in the service of progressing humanity, just in their way of doing so. And it's never, to my knowledge, really ever worked out that well. It doesn't have a great track record. but for whatever reason, it continues to be applied time and time again in these other countries. And I think it's because I think on its head, on its face, it seems like a good idea, right? I remember we had to read the Communist Manifesto in college, and I don't remember much about it, but I do remember thinking, okay, if I was just a poor person in this country, just fully disenfranchised, lost my all way, lost the only way that I knew how to make a living, and the government's not giving me anything, and so I start to organize with these other people who are also feeling the exact same way. We start to look at this is a different way to run life, because life right now is not working out very well. Our king, our czar, seems to not care at all. He gave us a constitution in 1906, but goes back on everything that we ever asked him for. So we got to find something else. We got to do something else. What do? They lean into communism. They lean into the leaders, people like Vladimir Lenin, later on Joseph Stalin, who are preaching basically the ideals of a Marxist society. And like I said, when I was in college, I could see how that could work. I could see how, I would at least show up to a couple meetings. I'd probably swing through. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm a communist, but let's look. If we're talking, it's 19. Like I said, if I describe the situation, the dire conditions that I just said to you, and the fact that your brothers and fathers have been dying in all these revolutions and fighting, and now they're going off to war, and nothing's happening well at home. Well, let's see what else we can do. So they fall into communism, and that is basically, like I said, the prevailing idea of the USSR. Now, there's not much, I think, is left to say about the 1905s. We get into the 1917, 1918s, where stuff really starts to kick up for Russia, because that's where we get the February Revolution and the October Revolution. Was very, I think the October Revolution was in 1917. It might have been in 1918, but like I said, this is a very tumultuous time for the entire world, let alone Russia. Like, we're literally in the midst of coming out of a world war, and Russia is just, can never seem to get it together on how they feel about itself, really, if to put it plainly. And I want to see if I have this right, because basically, I think, what is it? The Bolsheviks, there's two revolutions. There's the October Revolution and there's the February Revolution. Both happened, I think, in 1917 let me make sure I got them. Let me go back. And so the first one, I think, is not what causes Tsar Nicholas to actually abdicate. I think it's the second one. Let me see if I got that right. So basically, like, they changed governments twice in that same year. It was a very big year for the Russians. And so the October Revolution, which was officially known as the Great October Socialist Revolution, is also known as the Bolshevik Revolution that we spoke about earlier. They are one of the main players that become Soviet Russia. They are the Iron Curtain, if you will. And so the October Revolution was the second revolution in 1917 that took place through an armed insurrection in Petrograd, which is now St. Petersburg, on November the 7th of 1917, and it was the precipitating event of the Russian Civil War. Now, the Russian Civil War would go on for 5-6 years, and that's why I say it's so remarkable for anyone who lived in Russia during this time. It was just not a good time to be. Not that it's not a good time. I mean, I hope everyone can have their national pride, but I'm just saying, like, these guys, they fight in World War One. You know what I mean? And then as soon as World War One's over, they fight their own civil war for 6 years. Then they're chilling for a little bit. Then they're back fighting again in World War Two. There's just not a lot of downtime, not a lot of time to just hang out. But yeah, so we get the October Revolution, which leads us into the Russian Civil War, which goes from 1917 to 1923. And so what really happened, just to put it in a nutshell, because this is not about the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War is just a part of, how we get to the Soviet Union. It does result in the Russian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic, which later on becomes a union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is the USSR, which is what would rule the Russian continent for the next 65 years, I believe. And so we're going to talk about the USSR for a little bit, But that's really, I guess, where we're gonna leave it, because I'm not gonna talk about present day Russia too much. Just more, I just feel like this is probably because this is the Russia that falls into our theme. Truthfully, this is the USSR. That's what's part of the Cold War, and that's why I think it'll be interesting if anybody who's really following along. The bite-sized bios, as I've said, will start to reflect these same themes as well. Right now, we're gonna run at this for the next few months. It's something we follow into the fall, if not the winter time. So we're gonna definitely do bite-sized bio on Vladimir Lenin. We definitely have one coming on Stalin coming up pretty soon. Truman, Eisenhower, all the big players. I think we're finally gonna do one on Kennedy. We've already done Jackie O. Last year, I think maybe, but definitely. So yeah, that we get after the Russian Civil War, we get the USSR. And let's see, maybe we'll tell you who really started that off, and then that'll probably really be it. I think about for this episode, we can definitely run at it again. If there's something that's going to be missing, we'll talk about in the next episode, because once again, this will all be kind of going hand in hand, and that's really the whole point of this. I'm really hoping we can really kind of just get some stuff, find some interesting stuff that would have been left, maybe because I just kind of was bouncing from topic to topic. If I can really sit down, which is what I've been doing for these last few weeks and continuing weeks and months, is kind of stay in this little parameter, this little from the 40s to the 70s, and I'm already finding stuff, even on the outskirts of either side, and then the 30s that I feel like are also really important that we'll probably get to. But let's see, the USSR, cover that just real fast, and then we will be out of here. Like I said, it comes to power just after the Russian Civil War. I'm trying to see who was like the first. Okay, yeah. So Vladimir Lenin was the first leader of the USSR. He ruled it for 2 years, and then Joseph Stalin came in right after him. Like I said, we're going to cover Stalin very extensively in the bite-sized bios, which should be coming out. I'm not sure if it's coming out with this one or like the week after this one, or if like a week or two, because we got a couple already kind of in the pike. But yeah, so it goes Vlad to Joseph, then Malenkov, then Khrushchev, right? And then Brezhnev, pretty cool name, Brezhnev. Andropov, right? We're in the 80s now. And then we got Chernenko, and then Gorbachev, who was the last one that were actual real leaders. And of course, we talked about, if you listen to the last episode, the very first thing that was said was Ronald Reagan telling Gorbachev to tear down that wall. And that's why I think it's really interesting that we're doing all this in one actual theme, because it all goes together. It all goes together. Gorbachev was the last leader of the Soviet Union, which we have covered. Now we know that Soviet means council, right? It means council, and it started way back in 1905, when there was still a Russian Tsar ruling the Russian Empire. And like I said, we will see as we go along that Russia is a main player in a lot of things that happened in the 20th century. So it was worth covering and really kind of going in and just figuring out a little bit about these people. I want to know more. I definitely want to know more, because the history of Russia is so vast and deep. But I believe that is all for this week's. Yeah. All right. So that was Russia. Learned a lot. Learned a lot about Russia. I knew nothing about Russia before this, so all this was news to me. But even you learn more about it. You want to know more about it. Truthfully, in my opinion, from where I stand, because there's so many different parts I want to dive into. I want to dive into the Russian royalty of it. I want to learn about the czars more, right? I want to learn about how that works and how they were connected to the other royal families throughout Europe. I want to learn about these initial Rus people that came over and basically set the tone for what Russian people would be 1,300 years ago. I want to know about them. There's such a rich history that I do believe a Russia Part 2 will be on its way. I don't know when. It may come out in this themed episode still, because we're still talking about Russia, and we do have more Russian things to talk about. There's a Cold War episode coming, and we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. That's why I wanted to talk about Russia now, kind of give us a foundation for their history, before we just jump into saying Russia this, Russia that. Well, hold up. Let's go back and just talk about who these Russians are before we actually even get to all the things that they did. This is a good episode. Like I said, definitely number 2 going to be coming down the pike. Got a number 2 coming out for you guys. But as always, all the socials, HTT Happen, pretty much everything. HTTHappen.com for anything that all the extras and pictures and videos for all the pages and title cards, all that good stuff. I don't think there's much else to say. I do appreciate you guys coming back from week to week and always press and play. So I'll see you next week with the next bite-sized bio.